Thrilled to welcome to this discussion Dr. Shelly Jones Holt. She is a speaker, an author, a dedicated visionary, and inspires education and business leaders to cultivate equity-driven systemic change within their organizations, schools, and communities so that they can build a more just and promising future for all. I absolutely wanted to have her on today because she offers a unique perspective on navigating the complexities of DEI, transforming leadership practices, and creating sustainable impact in diverse environments. But also, it is so important with today, what is going on in the world, not only in the US, though largely in the US, but the ripple effect that has on everyone. So I'm really excited for this conversation. So Dr. Shelly, welcome, and tell me why you wanted to be part of a Women Leading Boldly Summit. What interested you to speak today?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. I appreciate just being able to be in the space. And I think that right now is a time more than ever when we need to learn from our ancestors in the women's rights movement. We need to learn what our ancestors that championed the civil rights movement, the Underground Railroad, all the women in history who have stood boldly against anything that did not treat and expect the equitable treatment of women in the workplace as a dire situation. And so I think right now more than ever, we need to stand, what I like to say is we need to stand 10 toes down on the fact that as women, as all women, we need to come together right now. We cannot survive what's happening right now in our world with internal divisiveness between us. And unfortunately, some of that internal divisiveness the division falls along race and class lines, along with religious lines across this world. And at a certain point, we have to realize that as women, we have been considered second-class citizens in every part of this world as we know it. And so right now more than ever, especially with what's happening in the States, we as women need to come together. And that's part of why I'm looking to speak at more international women's summits, because it is not just the women here in the States that need support. It is women all across this globe. And we're seeing a worldwide uptick in the professional spaces that women are taking up across the world. And so that's necessary. So that's part of why I wanted to be in this space, to help remind us as women that no matter what some man says about what we are and are not supposed to focus on, to kind of zip up the differences that have kept us divided, that kept the women's movement divided and only serving certain women. And now we can look back in history and go, hey, wait a minute. There were certain women that were excluded from that even then. And now we're seeing kind of a reigniting of that in certain senses. So I think right now is a huge time where I wanted to be out and speak about the ways that we can be courageous leaders, courageous meaning to push through fear, because it's really scary right now, and leadership meaning to serve. And right now, more than ever, we as women have to push through fear. And we are built for this, to push through the fears that have typically divided us, to serve one another, and to serve one another at high levels and unapologetically. We need to unapologetically serve one another. And we're not doing that very well, especially when we look at voting statistics and we have women even in this country, in the United States, that literally voted against their own best interest. And now we're finding out about that on the back end. It's like, well, wait a minute. We could predict and see this is going to happen. And so really looking at our history and historical context together is going to be critical for us as women. Relearning the history that we've learned in all of our respective countries, because it has been done from a male-dominated perspective. Now we need to understand, where were the women in the fights in France? Where were the women in the fights in, most of Europe? Because right now the history books have us almost silent on the role of women. And that's not true, first of all. And it's not empowering the generation that are coming behind to understand that there are things that we can stand upon, but we are always stronger when we stand together. So it's kind of a long answer to somewhat of a simple question, but I want to be in these spaces with women all over the world to let them know they're not alone. There are things that we can do, but we can only do them together.
And so, what do you think has become, if we look, I don't know if it is the past 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years, but what has become, I would say, the biggest, maybe the two biggest threats that you see to women standing up, leaning in, being in their leadership? What has changed, I guess, is the basis of my question. What has changed in recent history?
That's a really good question. So what has changed in recent history? So I'm going to answer the second part first, and then I'll come to the two things that I think have both contributed. And I think what's changed in recent history is the storytelling and the understanding of history from or on the part of women in particular. I think that as I was watching some of the things happen in the last, kind of couple of months here in the States, it became glaringly clear that many people in our society do not understand what happened historically and the significance of those things that happened historically, and what our call to action as the following generation is to make sure that these things that we believe were rights and protections can actually exist. And I think what's happening right now is that on a global stage, we're starting to see that we thought that once something was determined as a right, like it was there forever, like there's no going back on it. And with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, after we saw the slow manipulative shift of our Supreme Court and our judicial offices, we're seeing now the impact of not understanding the way civics works, not understanding the way government works, not understanding how historically, like, why is it that, you being from the States but living in another country, you remember the fact, or might have known, that our mothers couldn't have homes or credit cards in their own names. And so now, like, we remember that and we take that very seriously. How much or how well did we pass that on, or are we passing that on to the next generation so that they understand the severity of what some of these things mean, and we don't allow our leadership, our existence to become politicized? Because at a certain point, we start allowing this by staying. And so if anything right now, I think that seeing that and not understanding the way historically, like, some of our rights came to be and how quickly with the stroke of one man's pen, they could be literally swept away from us. And I think that moment is both good and bad for our society. Good in the sense of it's like, okay, I need y'all to understand this is a serious matter. But bad in the sense of, I'm sorry, it took us coming to this point, and whatever it is that's going to happen as a result, for us to realize how serious it was. And so the two things I think that keep women disjointed, if you will, and out of the movement, the first and the biggest one is fear. We're scared. And it is scary. And there's a legitimate reason to be scared, right? I mean, we don't necessarily talk about how, especially during the times of African enslavement in this country, the African-American women were the subject of the white men's sexual predatory behaviors in order to protect the white women from that. And so when enslavement was no longer the law of the land, they had to turn these unholy, unethical, inhumane desires to somebody, right? And so now white women were now realizing, oh my gosh, look what I've married, look what I've created. Right. We haven't necessarily worked on the root cause of the issues, much like we don't in human trafficking and such. We talk about human trafficking as if there aren't people that are buying the trafficked humans. Like, I need y'all to talk about this in a different way, because you're talking about the survivors and you're not talking about the dudes that are up here
doing it.
We don't want to that, right? We don't want to it's like, well, wait a minute, whose son, whose husband? Well, so if we talk about that, now we got to go back and come back to the issues within women and of ourselves. And so the fear, the layers and complexity of this onion of fear not just of losing our position as professional women, but having fear of having to face the reality of who our fathers, uncles, etc., children, sons really are and what they've done in these different lands. And the history is no different in France. The history is no different in Italy. No. The history is right in America, Mexico, and Canada. Like, those are the things that we as women, while they're all arguing and screaming DEI and all that, it's like, well, wait a minute, hold up. Who exactly are we set up to get these protections from? And that's another piece that we don't necessarily talk about, the fear of all these rights and legitimate laws were created to protect people from white men. And we don't want to talk about that part. That's the part that was like, she hit us there. But I need you to think about which of the laws that are being overturned or addressed or were not the result of white men behaving badly. I'll wait. But we don't like to talk about that. So the fear of talking about these root cause issues is one of the biggest reasons, because once you face that issue of who's doing all of this and where they come from and your relationship to them and relationship to that power that we may not want to admit that we have in some cases other than others, that's when the things will start to unravel. So the first thing is fear. The second one, I think, is... Go ahead, sir.
No, I'll come back to it in a minute, because the question is how do we address that fear? Like, concretely, is there something we can do to address that?
To address that. And yes, there is. And there actually is. It's just uncomfortable. Not unsafe. It is uncomfortable because it takes that first step. And so the second thing I think is really keeping us kind of in a second-class status, is inconsistency and lack of unified messaging on what to do. It goes back to what exactly your question is. It's like, we don't know. So we are really good, especially as women, at following in line with the dominant power structure and pointing out the problems. They're real good at pointing out this is a problem, this is a problem. And the solution usually is something around somebody else doing something different, right? Whereas for us, we need to be able to look very clearly in the mirror and realize where we contribute to the problems and solve the problem at our closest locus of control. And that is very uncomfortable, especially for many women who identify as white in our society and have not had to face their role in what's happened. So, across the world now, folks are realizing, okay, so right now I have a choice. I can either, as a female leader, especially as a female leader who is of the dominant race or the dominant power structure or the dominant class, right? If you're a rich, white, Christian, landowning woman, you have power by associating with that rich, white, landowning man. Right? And so now you're inextricably linked. And so we've got to get comfortable with the idea of, wait a minute, is that actually empowering me, or am I only in proximity to power and therefore taking, kind of an umbrella under that? And what does that mean for other people that I'm working with? And so that's this, unwritten dilemma that many folks are in. It's like, well, do I give up some of my power to actually focus on this women's leadership movement? Or do I want to retain my power and my comfort and convenience based on where I am racially or demographically or within my identity and somehow and it's like, well, what if there's no and there? What if either we all come up together and you might lose some of that as we all come up? Are you still willing to be in the fight if you're kind of like, ooh, I might have some discord at home? Yeah, you might. You might be put out the wheel. Yeah, you might. You might be, right, whatever that looks like. And if women who are of the dominant race and class aren't willing to face that reality and say, you know what, I don't care what it is that you think you have for me. I know that my bread is buttered better over here and it's going to last longer for my daughter, my granddaughters, etc. And so I think that those two things, having inconsistent and unified messaging on what to do, that also takes into account where we each sit differently in this space. So hopefully that's a long answer to a pretty, it seems really simple on the surface, but it's deep when you talk about what's really keeping us in our spaces.
No, it is deep. And I do want to put this out there for listeners also, that I think that, and I'm being very humble here, this is not a subject that I am well versed in. It is. And so there's also, I almost want to say, a level of shame also that people and me personally don't know as much, um so concretely, when somebody doesn't know enough or is unfamiliar with and clearly understand what the difficulty is, and the challenge that you've just articulated, simply put, what can we do as women in our organizations at work, in our schools, in our communities? What are some small, very concrete things that we can do to either build awareness, move the needle? Like, where would we even, how can we contribute concretely? And I'm saying I'm talking about all women who are listening to this, no matter where they are. How can women contribute to moving the needle?
So there are so many ways that women in particular can contribute. And again, the challenge comes in really facing the realities of what that would mean for us, and the fact that we have to face the fact that maybe we haven't done all that we believed that we could, first of all. And so I like to use this graphic. I don't know if I can share screen or I can give it
Yep.
to you. It's from Journey to Liberation, which is one of the, I don't want to call it a program, but it's kind of a session series. I don't know how to share. Oh, there it is. Here, I can share a screen. Hopefully.
And for those listening, what I will do is for those watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see it. If you're listening, I can include it in the show notes.
Right. Like, so this is what I'm going to speak to when we talk about what we can do. First of all, we can start to learn the racial and cultural historical history, the histories of people who are different from ourselves. So the first space is just learning. For example, when I was a principal of a school and we had 30,000 Hmong refugees that entered our area in Sacramento. Now, let me tell you, I didn't know, first of all, how to even spell Hmong, much less where the people were from, much less my understanding of the Vietnam War did not include understanding people that spoke Hmong, were of Hmong culture, where Laos was, and internment camps. Like, I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Here I am as, the assistant principal of a school on my way to becoming the principal of this school. And you're telling me I'm getting a third of my school population is being brought in, people that I know nothing about and may not know our language, don't know our customs, and I don't know them, right? Because I speak fluent Spanish. And so I had never been in a situation where there were people that I couldn't communicate with. It was a very disheartening position to be in. It felt a little unsafe at times because I felt like, I'm getting in these meetings that I don't know what they're saying, what they're talking about. So I finally understood what my colleagues would feel when they're in a meeting with a Spanish-speaking parent, or they're in a meeting with an African-American parent or a Polynesian parent, and you don't understand because there's all these cultural and language differences, and you're there to talk about education. And so the first thing I had to do was understand who it is these people are. Where did they come from? What it might be some of their challenges? What are some of their cultural customs? Well, oftentimes as people, we don't take the time to learn about other folks. We don't. Mm-hmm. We make an assumption because we're all from a certain country, or we all are from a certain race, or we're all from a certain religion, that we are monolithic. And that is not the case. So the first thing we can do as people for one another is get to know people, but also get to know folks' history and their culture and where they come from. And that could come from affinity groups, that can come from friendships, that can come from going to lunch together. And it's just like you would do getting to know a new girlfriend and her family. I mean, you're going to want to know, like, hey, where are you from? What you been up to? What's your life like, right? It's the same exact conversation, only there's now a cultural aspect to it. And that's where we don't tend to, as women, want to go deeper because we want to be nice. It's the reason why I can walk up to another Black woman and go, hey, girl, how you doing? And we've never met each other, but I know we have these shared experiences because of how we show up and how we identify. And so that identity does not become a barrier to us getting to know each other and getting to know our stories. Mm-hmm. We have to face the fact that if you and I were to get to know each other on a deep level, we're going to have to, at one point in our conversation, face the fact that you walking around in the world looking like you do, I'm walking around in this world looking like I do, and that means a difference. And so within understanding that racial and cultural historical literacy, we start to understand and appreciate some of our differences and not let that get in the way. And that's what's known as cultural proficiency. It's the idea of, oh gosh, each other, and I can get to know that there are probably differences in who you are that you have coming from Maine. There are differences in who you are now that have come from living in the south of France. There are differences based on whether or not you have kids, whether or not you're married, whether you're married to a man or a woman or multiple people, whether you have multiple kids or what. Like all of these differences contribute to culture, and culture is not a bad thing. Culture literally means that you have a way of doing things and a way of operating and understanding the world. I have a way of doing things and operating and understanding the world, and they're different. That's all it is. And that we're getting to know each other's differences. As we get to know each other's differences, we'll now start to understand how we operate within a system. So what can we actually do? It goes back to getting to know histories. It's getting to know one another and being unapologetic about the differences and saying to someone like, hey, Karen, what's it like? Do you mind if I ask you a question? What's it like wearing glasses? Right? Because that's a difference that we share. Now, I put mine on, right? At the moment, right? That's a difference that we share. And differences show up as just that. Now, the minute we start talking about glasses differences, we're going to have all kind of conversation. And that's great. But why couldn't we also talk about the racialized differences and the differences of living now in France versus me right now living in California versus like, these are all things that we can talk about, and we need to be unapologetic about what we don't know. I don't know jack diddly nor squat about what it's like for you as a woman living as a ex-American or expat in South France. And I'm making an assumption you're an expat, right? So, I mean, but I don't know anything about that. And that's okay. If I can ask you, hey, Karen, do you mind me asking a little bit about life in the South of France? And you're going to say either yes or no. You're either in the mood to talk about it or you're in the mood to talk about it. And so that's one of a very concrete strategy that folks can use is before you jump into asking people personal questions. And this is for a lot of my European brethren. I love y'all, but y'all jump into the personal questions before asking like, hey, do you mind if I ask you some questions about who you are so I can get to know you better? Right. And just asking permission is a cultural norm that in my culture, I would say yes or no. And then that way you would know, like, am I welcome to now be curious? Or is it not welcome? And so just not making the assumption that everybody is there to teach you about themselves and wants to be your, companion, but asking permission, doing your own homework, and understanding that differences are okay. The third thing we can do, and yes, I have a list, honey, of about 5 things we can do. So the third is understand the way systems treat us differently. And so once I start asking you about what it's like to live in France, then I would ask about like, how is it different from America? Help me understand what are some of the things that are different. Now I'm in a place of learning about how the system impacts you as a person who you are.
And I just want to cut you off for 1 second. The system meaning the government, the life.
No. I'm talking about all the above. And so when we talk about systems, we use kind of an upside down triangle to talk about the way policies happen, the way that money flows is part of the system, the way that things are practiced, they're implemented, the relationships you have is all part of your system, the way power is throughout, your organization or your country or your community, and then the mindsets or mental models. So those are the 6 components that we talk about that make up a system. And if you want to change them, you kind of look at those different components. So we're talking about policies, practices, money, relationships, power, mindsets, right? So when we understand how all of that orients towards who you are and your identity, your class, your social status, now I have a better understanding of what life is like for you. Whereas that might be different if, let's say, you were in Russia, or let's say you were in the Philippines, or let's say you were in America. And so understanding that systems and geography impact us differently. And we just talk about it. It's not about going, oh, well, let me see how bad things are for you and see if I can play a Prussian Olympics. That's not the point. The point is to figure out what life is like for you so I can understand you better and then interact better as colleagues or comrades or whatever we are. The other thing that you can see on this list, that once I understand your history, I can understand and appreciate our differences. I can understand the way the system responds to you. Now I'm able to push through fear and lead. Now I'm able to say, okay, maybe Karen, there are some shared challenges and issues that we can jump in on together. For example, if we are mothers raising sons, now we have a place of commonality. So you see, this talks about courageous leadership, where we live, where we learn, and where we earn, because this is where all the different spaces and places of our identity shows up. And so maybe we might not be able to connect too much if you work, let's say, in forestry and I work in public speaking. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm just throwing things out there. There may or may not be some commonalities. But if we're both mothers of teenage sons with autism, now we have some commonality that we can lead from and build our relationship upon. So courageous leadership, if you remember, it is to push through fear and serve. And so how do we push through fear to serve in our workspaces, in our community spaces, and in our homes? And now if I understand a little bit more, like right now, my kids are learning deeply about differently abled folks. We have a neighbor whose son has crutches, actually he has a wheelchair and crutches because he has, so I don't know exactly what's going, I never even actually asked. I just know that he uses different mechanisms and tools to get around. And that's the way I explained it to my kids. Well, now being with someone who's differently able, they have mindsets that they had around him. And one of, like, for example, my 8-year-old came the other day, he goes, "Hey, Mom, Zach's really smart." And I'm like, "Okay, say more." He's like, "Well, I just figured," I said, "so you stereotyped and made assumptions about his intelligence based on how he gets around the world." He's like, "Yeah, I actually did." That's how we start to bring it into our homes and help our young people understand that you having assumptions about his intelligence because the way his legs work literally makes no sense. So I'm going to need you to work through that, and let's talk through that. And that's how courageous leadership starts to happen, where we start to call people in and call issues out. And that's what leads us to transformation. So that's other things that we could do is in our homes, in our communities, when we see something that is not quite gelling, we call people in and we call issues out. And over time, if we're all doing this together, now we're leading to a place where we call true liberation, which is freedom from the shackles of fear, freedom from the issues that we create internally within ourselves. And those are, just a few concrete things that we can do. Learn about each other, appreciate our differences, be able to understand the world impacts us differently based on where we sit, lead starting at home first by calling issues out and calling people in, and truly unshackling ourselves from the fears that have been created around us. And so hopefully, folks, I would love to hear what folks pulled out of that about what they can do for themselves, because this shows up differently for every person. And this is why I give folks an array of things you can do. And what I often say is choose one you're going to work on for the next 2 weeks, just one. Like I'm going to work on understanding I have a new person at work who is of Muslim descent, and I don't know anything about Muslims other than they wear something different on their head, and I don't even know why, right? Let me go and do my research. Let me pick one person or one identity characteristic or one thing that I'm going to do to educate myself. And you could pick something in each of these areas. You could just pick one thing overall. But imagine the power of every woman listening to this and at this summit, pick one thing every week that they're going to work on improving for themselves and their colleagues.
And what I hear also is, or one of my key takeaways is there's this skill, I think also that takes a very intentional, we have to be intentional about it, which is curiosity, and which is listening, and which is non-judgmental. And the brain is, I think, formatted to judge. And that
absolutely, it's psychological.
Is absolutely, I think, but I think it's something that you can definitely learn to not judge yourself, your others, and circumstances, and just to listen with curiosity, like almost like you're an anthropologist or you're just observing. You're a Martian that's come to this planet and just observing and asking questions. And I think that people, and I just want to say, for example, a lot of times I'm afraid sometimes to ask questions because I don't want to offend somebody.
That part. Well, and that's where the asking permission comes in, because you're absolutely right. Like if I just jumped in and started asking you all these questions versus if I were to say, you know what, Karen, I am really trying to learn a bit more about, French heritage, French culture, what it's like living out there. Do you mind if I ask you some questions about what life is like for you living in France after living in America? And you have the option to say, yes, I want to engage in that conversation or not. part of the way that privilege shows up is in making the assumption that somebody has to answer any question that you have on your brain. Just because you're curious does not mean I am there to curb your curiosity about my life, right? But the power of asking permission says, I value you enough and I understand that what I'm asking you to share is deep and I want to give you an option versus just coming in. And it's always kind of striking to me when people just automatically just start, well, tell me about this and tell me about that. It's like, well, did you even ask me if I wanted to tell you about that? Or, and so understanding that that in and of itself is part of where the discomfort comes. It's like, well, how do I enter the conversation? Because I want to know these things. Yeah. What I always tell people is, well, first ask them permission if they want to tell you those things. And then now you're in a bit different space. Well, what do I do if they say no? You go on to something or somebody else. That's what you do. There are how many gajillion billion people on this planet? So if your purpose in getting to know them was to know those things and they don't want to share those things with you, or, okay, well, you're going to have to take that. Versus, well, then you could ask, well, are there other things that we could talk about that you would be willing to talk about? Because I would love to get to know you better. I'm not sure what to ask about. And you could even say, because of our geographic and racial differences, I'm not sure how to enter this conversation. Can you help me out? Like, I would love to get to know you better. What are you willing to talk about? And then I could say, oh, well, I would love to talk about my kids, to ask the questions about my kids. Well, great. Well, now we have a place to start from. And so I think part of it is, as women and empowered women and curious women, because a smart woman is a curious woman. I tell that to my students all the time. So we don't want to curb their curiosity, but we want to place it in a space where your curiosity doesn't infringe upon my privacy or how much I want to share or feeling like you're entitled to know my story. And so that's one thing that I'll say is like the asking permission is huge. And we just don't take enough time or consideration to do that amongst one another.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And so tell us specifically what you do. So are you working in a school? Are you only do you work with clients? So like if somebody wanted to reach out to you, how would they find you? What kind of services do you offer? Tell me a little bit about how people work with you, if they do.
Well, work with me. Yes. Well, people do work with me. And our company is expanding really fast because we do this work without shame, blame, or victimization. That's one of our mottos. I do not bring people into my space. I don't want anybody to be ashamed of who they are, of their heritage, of how they were raised, of what they know or what they don't know. And so what I like to call, like, my place is neutral ground. When folks come into my trainings, whether it's a training, whether it's a retreat, whether it's an learning experience tour, this is about us learning, growing, and coming together. If you're here because you want to fight and argue and get into all that other stuff, there are other places you can go, just not here. Because I don't play that mess. No one's going to learn and grow and want to come together in a space where I'm made to feel guilty because I'm white, or I'm made to feel like I'm a victim, or I'm a complainer because I'm of African descent, or I'm made to feel like I'm an idiot because I'm a woman, or whatever that is. That is not the way learning works. And I am a teacher at my core. So I just want to be very clear when folks come to work with me. So what do? I have executive leadership coaching and support services. So I support whether it's superintendents, CEOs, executive, C-suite leaders on how to build teams and maintain their diverse talent. What many leaders figured out in the DEI movement that is still happening, and we see that there are white men in America in particular, are those who check the white box in America, who are adamantly against it. And the reason why is because it forces us to act and treat people as they need to be treated and get them what they need, as opposed to just what we have to offer, which is very counterintuitive. But with anybody at high levels of business will tell you, I'm going to treat my people well, and I want in order for my people to do good work and make me look good, make me money. Like it's a very basic business model, if you will. But here's the deal. If I don't recognize that if you're working with me, you have different needs than Shelly does, than Art does, than Phil does, than Patrick does, and all of these people have different needs. Well, 10 years ago, that was just called good business. But unfortunately, we catered the meeting of needs around certain people more than others. And so now it became because that, and let me just say, it was because it was more convenient. If I work with an entire group of Black women, even though they are not monolithic, I know some things about how to work with Black women that are going to definitely make our organization feel and be more comfortable for Black women. Now, those same tactics, if you were to come into that space, Karen, you might be like, oh my gosh, this is just not a comfortable space for me. It's different. It's, we might, we have conversations, and yes, we do talk over each other. That's just part of how our quote, but we get things done. That's just part, but whereas in Eurocentric culture, it's very much a your turn, and then your turn, and then we wait, right? And then we, right? That's just a different way of handling business. Doesn't mean one is better than the other, one is more effective than the other. One works for this group of people, one works for that group of people. And so what I do in my work is I help leaders understand how to serve the different needs of their people without losing themselves in their integrity. Because there's nothing wrong with who you are, but you might need to provide something different. Best example I can give, I had a tech company CEO who I've been working with for a couple of years. And like literally, we have been working together every month. And I'm talking him through different strategies. And he's very resistant to it. I believe in meritocracy. I believe in, everybody gets the same thing. Then his daughter became pregnant. I loved it. I couldn't wait. This whole daughter being pregnant. I was like, oh, how's the baby? Oh, it's wonderful. He's just the top. He's right. So then his daughter goes back to work and he gets on the phone. Dr. Holt. I said, yes, sir. What is it? Can you believe her place of business got her back there after 6 weeks and did not have a place for her to pump milk? And so my daughter's calling. And I said, oh, I couldn't wait. He told his whole story. I was like, and so we're talking, and after a while, because normally I'm taking notes during our session, right? And after a while, he realizes I'm looking at him like this through the computer. I'm just looking. And about halfway through his story, he's like, it hit him. He's like, this is what you've been talking about. She has a different need. I said, no. Remember, we treat everybody the same. The man that came back after 6 weeks didn't need a private place to pump. So nobody should need a private place to pump, right? I literally saw this great big burly man. He sat back in his chair. He's like, I get it. He's like, she just has a different need. It doesn't mean that. I said, exactly. So she probably needs an office that now has blinds and a locked door and a sign on her door that says for this 20-minute time period. Now, I don't know if you understand. I said, I'm going to tell you, sir, I've pumped several times we've been on the phone. You just don't know, right? Because it's not. I can still get work done and pump, believe it or not. Now, I don't have to, but I can still do that. He's like, you have? I said, you do know I have a 3-year-old that's been working with me. Like, let's do the math, sir. He's like, I never thought of that. I said, exactly. And that. So my point in bringing that up is that I work with leaders to help them see that providing people what they need, when they need it, in the way they need it delivered, which is our definition of equity, providing people what they need, when they need it, and the way they need it delivered. That's Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade's definition with a little bit of Dr. Holt on the side, is what the goal and purpose of the movement that we're talking about is. And that's the same whether someone has a vision problem or a vision difference. I shouldn't say problem, a visual difference, a height difference where they can't reach the top shelves, whether they have a need based on neurological or biological. We all have different needs to be most successful. I said, so imagine how much work she went through calling you, being frustrated, being upset, having to now go to her boss, talk to you, all that energy she had to put into just being able to pump versus if they had a policy, all that mental energy that she just spent was all wasted time and money from that company, right? And if we don't see that, we run into problems. So that's part of what I help executives do. I also work with their executive leadership team on collaborative decision-making, understanding the needs of their people, and being able to design their teams around the needs of their people. And what's happened now, every one of my clients has seen no less than a 25% increase in efficiency. They've seen no less than a 30% retention rate of their employees. Yeah, so these things talking about are because they're just about being people-centered. What I also do is I do workshops for companies and organizations around what you just saw on the screen, the journey to liberation, to walk people through how do you understand the history? How do you develop cultural proficiency in your organization? How do we understand the way systems around us impact us and decrease efficiency based on not having systems that work for the people that you have in front of you? And how do we lead courageously where we live, learn, and earn? You can also read if you would like to take some of our online courses and if you would like to do some of our family leadership work. Because remember, these issues did not start at work or at school. They started at home. And so how do we actually talk about and have conversations like the one I talked about with my son around his new friend? How do we have those conversations at home in ways that are affirming and loving and supportive and not saying, hey, that racist history or hey, that xenophobic history, we're going to address that. We don't have to say that out loud. We could definitely do the good work without making our children feel bad and like they're less than because they're going to make cultural or mistakes. And that's what they are. I call them like cultural faux pas. You're going to have them. So what do I do when my kid walks up and goes, hey, that guy has no legs? And, set my little 4-year-old. I was just like, I'm so embarrassed. Like, what? But he saw what he saw. He's literally saying what he sees. How do you turn that moment into a teachable moment where it brings everybody together versus running, hiding like you're the worst parent ever? And so that's what we do on our sessions, our tours. And if folks want to reach me, you can simply go to our website, leadershiplegacyconsulting.com or familylegacy5.com, or you can just hit me on Facebook or on my email, Dr. Shelly Holt at Leadership Legacy Consulting or support at familylegacy5.com. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. And we do design tailored programs for our clients. And so I invite folks to just come be part of the movement. Let's work together. Let's do this work together. And it does not have to be anything that violates laws or brings shame, blame, or victimization into the space. That is not.
Yeah. And so I will definitely list all of those resources and how everybody can contact you. No, it's great that there's so many different ways. And I think that the work that you're doing is so important. And I just do want to close by the other thing that I love about what you said is the no shame, the no blame. You said no shame, no blame, and what was the third one?
No guilt, no victimization. No shame, no blame, no guilt, no victimization. We don't play any of that mess. And I do that. I say it very clearly, and I will stop it if folks go into those modes.
Yeah.
So, sometimes we'll have a few tears and such, but, emotional tears are okay. Guilt-ridden tears, that are trying to, absolve yourself from facing some harsh truths are not. Like, we're not going there. We're going to face this all together because we all have played a role in this. And that's a hard pill for a lot of folks to swallow. We've all done it.
Yeah. And I think the reason why also it's so important is we just have to, for me, for so many people, at least here in France, there's still so much awareness, basic baseline level awareness that needs to be done. And believe it or not, the United States is way ahead of a lot of European countries. So I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing and also for today to really break it down because it can be a very intimidating topic for a lot of people to not know where to start, what to say, the embarrassment, the shame, all of it very emotional. So thank you so much for being concrete, breaking it down. I would love to also share your one-pager that you shared on the screen.
Yeah. And I'll send it to you.
You can send it to me. I'll link it to the show notes. And just want to thank everybody for tuning in. Please go check out Dr. Shelly. Her energy is contagious. I hope that people are watching this. If not, go on YouTube and watch it. And yes, so thank you again. Any last words?
Thank you. What I'll say to folks is that, I know that what's happening right now can be very scary, but I want to remind us that we come from a very strong lineage of very strong women who did not crumble under that fear, right? We have beautiful women in our history that we can turn to and understand that they were scared too. Harriet Tubman was scared. Sojourner Truth was scared. Helen Keller was scared. Like, let's be very clear when we talk about these beautiful women that we now want to uplift and emulate, but we also need to face the fact that they were scared too, and they did it anyway. And so I want to encourage each of us that we are more powerful together, and courageousness means pushing past fear, and it's much easier to do together. So I invite us to lock arms as we do this and find the commonalities as opposed to the differences. Let's face the harsh truth instead of being comfortable with some of the lies that have kept us complacent, and know that this work is out of love. And so I could not end this without saying, I love you. I love you so deeply. All the work that we do here at Courageous Leadership is out of love. So if nobody said, I love you today, please know you heard it today. I love you for listening to this. I love you for standing in the gap. I love you for the women you've helped. I love you for the men that you've helped. I love you for who you're going to help. This work is about love. And I truly, truly, from the bottom of my heart, love each and every one of you, because we are standing in the gap. Even the little things we do, they stand in the gap. And so if nobody tell you they love you, please know you are loved, and make the rest of your day, your week great. But if you cannot, and you're struggling to do that, don't you dare ruin anybody else's. Y'all have a great one. And thank you for listening.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for that final message. So signing off, thank you everybody for listening. This was fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Shelly.
Thank you, Miss Karen. Appreciate you.
Oh, that was great. Was that okay with you?
Yeah, honey, I told you I'm going to be me regardless. Like, I don't know how to be anything but me. So,